Itbu, Hercule Poirot's cleverest trap that caught a killer. Chapter 1. The whisper of motive. The grand ballroom of Ashford Manor glowed under the soft light of a dozen chandeliers, their crystals scattering prisms across the polished oak floor. The air was thick with the scent of lavender and cigar smoke, mingling with the laughter of England's elite. It was the kind of gathering Hercule Poirot relished, not for the extravagance, but for the secrets that shimmered beneath the surface, like fish darting in a pond. Poirot stood near a marble pillar, his small, meticulous frame almost invisible among the swirl of silk gowns and tailored suits. His moustache, waxed to perfection, twitched slightly as he sipped a glass of crème de menthe, his eyes scanning the room. He had been invited by Lady Beatrice Ashford, the widowed mistress of the manor, to join her weekend soirée as a distinguished guest. But Poirot knew better. Invitations like these always carried an undercurrent of trouble. "Mon ami," he murmured to Captain Arthur Hastings, who stood beside him, fidgeting with his cufflinks. "Observe the room. It is a stage, and every guest plays a part. But who, I wonder, is the villain?" Hastings, ever the loyal but slightly baffled companion, frowned. "Villain? It's just a party, Poirot. Look at them, drinking, dancing, not a care in the world. Pinch." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Ah, Hastings, you see, but you do not observe. The smile that is too wide, the glance that lingers too long. These are the threads of a tapestry not yet woven. And I, Hercule Poirot, shall unravel it." As the string quartet struck up a waltz, Poirot's attention was drawn to a small group near the fireplace. Lady Beatrice, her silver hair swept into an elegant chignon, was speaking in low tones to a man Poirot recognized, Sir Reginald Vance, a financier with a reputation for ruthless ambition. Beside them stood Miss Clara Langley, a young heiress whose delicate beauty was marred by the nervous way she clutched her champagne flute. The fourth figure, Dr. Edmund Holt, a physician with a penchant for amateur botany, leaned in, his face half-shadowed by the firelight. Poirot edged closer, his movements as unobtrusive as a cat's. The conversation was hushed, but his sharp ears caught fragments. "Cannot be allowed to continue," Sir Reginald was saying, his voice tight with suppressed anger. "It's a disgrace, Beatrice, and you know it." Lady Beatrice's lips thinned. "Reginald, you mustn't speak so loudly. Walls have ears." Clara's eyes darted to Dr. Holt, who gave a small, almost imperceptible shake of his head. "It's not worth the risk," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Not now." Poirot's fingers tightened around his glass. A motive, he thought. Not clear, not yet, but present. A whisper of intent, like the first note of a storm. Itodidiku made a mental note of their faces, their postures, the way their words danced around something unsaid. The music swelled, and the group dispersed as if startled by their own shadows. Poirot returned to Hastings, who was now engrossed in a conversation with a jovial colonel about cricket. Poirot interrupted with a polite smile. "Hastings, my friend, tell me, have you noticed anything unusual about our hostess or her guests?" Hastings blinked. "Unusual? Well, Lady Beatrice seems a bit on edge, but hosting a party like this would make anyone nervous. Why, what's caught your eye?" Poirot's smile was enigmatic. "A thread, Hastings. a single thread in the fabric of this evening. It may lead to nothing, or it may lead to murder. As the clock struck 10, the guests moved towards the dining hall, their laughter echoing through the manor's corridors. Poirot lingered, his gaze fixed on the fireplace where the conversation had taken place. He bent down, his movements precise, and picked up a small object from the hearth. A single petal, vibrant red, from a flower not native to the manors. Gardens. Curieux, he murmured, slipping the petal into his pocket. Very curious indeed. The night was young, but Hercule Poirot knew one thing with certainty. The stage was set, the players were in place, and the whisper of motive would soon grow into a scream. Chapter 2. The Vanishing Alibi. The morning sun barely penetrated the heavy fog that clung to Ashford Manor, casting a ghostly pallor over the sprawling estate. Inside, the atmosphere was far grimmer. The discovery of Sir Reginald Vance's body in the rose garden had shattered the previous night's elegance, replacing it with a cacophony of whispers, gasps, and thinly veiled accusations. Hercule Poirot stood at the edge of the garden, his polished shoes carefully avoiding the dew-soaked grass. The body had been removed, but the scene remained vivid in his mind. Sir Reginald sprawled among the thorns, his face frozen in a rictus of surprise, a single stab wound to the chest. The weapon, a slender letter-opener, lay discarded nearby, its silver handle glinting mockingly in the dawn light. Mon Dieu, Poirot murmured, his eyes narrowing as he surveyed the garden. A crime of passion, perhaps, or one of cold calculation? The little grey cells, they must work quickly, Captain. Hastings, standing beside him, looked pale. Ghastly business, Poirot. Stabbed in the heart, out here in the open. Whoever did it must have been bold as brass. Bold, yes, Poirot agreed, but not reckless. Observe, Hastings, the garden is secluded, hidden from the manors. Windows. The killer chose this place with care. But why? And when? The local constable, a nervous man named Inspector Grayson, had already begun questioning the guests, but his methods were clumsy, his questions too blunt. Poirot, with Lady Beatrice's reluctant permission, had taken it upon himself to assist. He began with the alibis, gathering the suspects in the manor's drawing-room, where the air was thick with tension. Lady Beatrice sat rigidly, her hands folded in her lap. I was in my study, reviewing household accounts, she said, her voice steady, but her eyes avoiding Poirot's. I heard nothing until the maid screamed at dawn. Miss Clara Langley, her face pale as porcelain, claimed she had retired early, overwhelmed by the evening's festivities. I was in my room alone, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I took a sleeping draught and woke only when the commotion began. Dr. Edmund Holt, his fingers stained faintly with ink, said he had been in the library, cataloguing his botanical notes. I often work late, he explained, adjusting his glasses. The library is on the opposite side of the manor. I saw no one, heard nothing. The other guests, a retired colonel, a gossip-prone dowager, and a young barrister, offered similar accounts, each claiming to have been tucked away in their own corner of the manor. But Poirot's attention lingered on Clara Langley. Her alibi was too perfect, too solitary. No one to confirm it, no one to contradict it. And yet, her trembling hands betrayed a fear that went beyond grief. "Tell me, Mademoiselle Langley," Poirot said, his tone gentle but probing, "this sleeping draught. Did you prepare it yourself?" Clara's eyes widened. Yes, of course. It's just a mild tonic, prescribed by my doctor in London." "And you took it at what hour, precisely?" She hesitated, her fingers twisting the lace of her handkerchief. "Around 10:30, I believe. Yes, 10:30. Poirot's moustache twitched. "Curieux, the clock in the hall struck 10, and yet you were still in the ballroom, non? I recall seeing you near the fireplace, speaking with Sir Reginald." A murmur rippled through the room. Clara's face flushed, and she stammered, I must have been mistaken. It was earlier, perhaps 10. I retired soon after." Poirot said nothing, but his eyes gleamed with quiet satisfaction. A crack in the alibi, small but significant. He turned his attention to the physical evidence, requesting to examine the letter opener. Inspector Grayson handed it to him, wrapped in a cloth. Poirot studied it closely, noting the intricate engraving on the handle, a crest, faintly familiar. "This belongs to the manor, oui?" Poirot asked Lady Beatrice. She nodded, her expression guarded. "It's one of a set, kept in the study. Anyone could have taken it. Anyone with access," Poirot corrected, "and anyone with motive." As the interrogations continued, Poirot's mind churned. Clara's alibi was unravelling. But why? Was she the killer, or was she protecting someone else? And the letter opener, its presence in the garden suggested opportunity, but its origin hinted at premeditation. He slipped away to the study, where the remaining letter openers sat in a velvet-lined box. One slot was empty, confirming Lady Beatrice's claim. But something else caught his eye. A faint smudge of red on the desk, barely noticeable, matching the petal he had found the previous night. "Another thread," Poirot whispered, his fingers brushing the smudge. "The tapestry begins to take shape." Back in the drawing-room, the guests dispersed, their alibis hanging like fragile ornaments, ready to shatter under scrutiny. Poirot knew the killer was among them, watching, waiting, and he, Hercule Poirot, would ensure they made a fatal misstep. Chapter 3. The Mask of Innocence. The drawing-room of Ashford Manor, with its velvet drapes and gilded mirrors, seemed to close in on its occupants as the weight of Sir Reginald Vance's murder settled over the household. The guests, though dressed in mourning black, wore their innocence like masks, each carefully crafted to deflect suspicion. Hercule Poirot, seated in a high-backed chair, observed them with the precision of a watchmaker, his dark eyes flitting from one face to another, seeking the telltale crack in their facades. "Mon ami," he said softly to Captain Hastings, who was fidgeting beside him, "the human heart is a theatre, and here we have a cast of actors, but one among them plays the role of innocence too well, and that Hastings is where we shall find our truth." Hastings frowned, his brow creasing. "Too well? Poirot, they all look shaken to me. Murder in the house, bound to rattle anyone." Poirot's moustache curved slightly. "Rattled, yes, but observe the nuances. The tremble that is rehearsed, the tear that falls too promptly. These are the signs of a performance. And I, Hercule Poirot, am an expert in spotting the encore." The room was a study in contrasts. Lady Beatrice Ashford, the consummate hostess, moved with regal poise, offering condolences to the guests while deflecting questions about the investigation. Her grief seemed genuine, yet Poirot noted how her eyes darted to the door whenever Inspector Grayson entered, as if expecting unwelcome news. Miss Clara Langley, still pale from her earlier interrogation, sat near the window, her hands folded demurely, but her fingers betrayed her, twisting a ring with relentless anxiety. Dr. Edmund Holt, the botanist-physician, busied himself with a leather-bound notebook, scribbling notes with an air of detachment, though Poirot caught him glancing at Clara with a flicker of concern. The other guests played their parts as well. Colonel Mortimer, a blustering retired officer, spoke loudly of justice for poor Vance while gripping his whisky glass too tightly. Mrs. Evelyn Pritchard, the dowager with a penchant for gossip, fluttered her fan and dropped veiled accusations about everyone, her sharp eyes missing nothing. The young barrister, Mr. Julian Trent, maintained a studied neutrality, offering polite sympathies, but volunteering little else. Poirot's attention, however, kept returning to Clara Langley. Her fragility was convincing, yet there was something in her posture, a rigidity, a calculated stillness, that intrigued him. He decided to test her mask. "Mademoiselle Langley," he said, rising and approaching her with a courteous bow. "A word, if you please. The shock of this tragedy must be great for one so young. Tell me, how did you know Sir Reginald?" Clara's eyes widened, but she recovered quickly, her voice soft. "Oh, only slightly, Monsieur Poirot. He was a friend of Lady Beatrice's, and I met him a few times at social gatherings. He was kind, I suppose." "Kind," Poirot repeated, his tone neutral, but his gaze piercing. "And yet, last night I observed you speaking with him by the fireplace. The conversation seemed intense, non?" Her fingers froze on the ring, and for a moment her mask slipped, a flash of panic in her eyes. "Intense? No, it was nothing. Just polite talk. I don't recall the details." Poirot tilted his head, his smile disarming. "Curieux, mademoiselle. The memory, it is so selective, is it not? Perhaps the little grey cells will assist you later." He stepped back, leaving her visibly shaken, and turned his attention to Dr. Holt, who had closed his notebook with a snap. "Doctor," Poirot said, approaching, "your work with plants, it is fascinating, oui? I understand you have a particular interest in rare species. Tell me, do you cultivate flowers here at the manor?" Holt's expression remained guarded, but his fingers tightened on the notebook. "I have a small greenhouse, yes, but my work is academic. Studies of medicinal properties mostly. Nothing to do with this tragedy." "Of course," Poirot said smoothly, "and yet I found a petal, vibrant red, near the fireplace last night. Not a rose, not a common bloom. Perhaps from your collection?" Holt's jaw tightened, but he shook his head. "Many flowers grow in the manor's gardens. It could be anything." Poirot nodded, his eyes never leaving Holt's face. Another mask, he thought, and another crack. The petal, the smudge in the study, the faltering alibis, they were pieces of a puzzle, and the picture was beginning to form. As the afternoon wore on, Poirot moved among the guests, asking innocuous questions that carried hidden barbs. To Lady Beatrice he inquired about the manor's staff, noting her hesitation when discussing the butler's whereabouts. To Colonel Mortimer he asked about Sir Reginald's business dealings, catching the Colonel's fleeting glance toward Mrs. Pritchard. Each response, each gesture, was a brushstroke on Poirot's mental canvas. By the time the clock struck 4, Poirot had gathered enough to know that the killer was not only cunning, but desperate to maintain their mask of innocence. Clara's nervousness, Holt's defensiveness, Lady Beatrice's guardedness, they all pointed to secrets, but whose secret was deadly? Hastings, Poirot said as they stepped into the corridor, away from prying ears. The killer is here, among us, playing their part with skill. But the mask cannot hold forever. We must watch, and we must listen. For the moment, it slips. Hastings nodded, though his expression was dubious. I hope you're right, Poirot. This lot seems too polished to crack. Poirot's eyes twinkled. Polished, yes, but even the finest porcelain shatters under pressure. And I, Hercule Poirot, shall apply just the right touch. As they returned to the drawing-room, Poirot's mind was alight with possibilities. The petal, the letter-opener, the whispered conversation by the fireplace. They were threads, and soon he would weave them into a net to catch a killer. Chapter 4. The Clue in the Candlelight. The evening at Ashford Manor descended with an oppressive weight, the fog outside thickening as if to mirror the growing unease within. Dinner had been a strained affair, with forced pleasantries and sidelong glances replacing the previous night's gaiety. Hercule Poirot, seated at the long mahogany table, observed the guests with his usual meticulous care, noting how each avoided mention of Sir Reginald Vance's murder, as if silence could erase the stain of death. As the meal concluded, a sudden gust rattled the windows, and the electric lights flickered, plunging the dining room into darkness. Gasps and murmurs filled the air, followed by the scrape of chairs and the clink of glass. Lady Beatrice's voice, sharp with authority, cut through the chaos. Stay calm, everyone. The generator must be acting up. Jenkins, fetch the candles. The butler, Jenkins, hurried to comply, and soon the room was bathed in the soft, wavering glow of candlelight. Shadows danced on the walls, lending an eerie intimacy to the scene. Poirot's eyes, sharp as ever, seized the moment. Candlelight, he knew, revealed what electric light concealed, subtle truths hidden in fleeting expressions and unguarded gestures. Mon ami, he whispered to Captain Hastings, who was clutching his napkin nervously. The darkness is a gift. It strips away the masks, if only for a moment. Observe, Hastings, observe. Hastings muttered, I'd rather observe with proper lighting, Poirot. This feels like a stage for another crime. Poirot's moustache twitched with amusement, but his attention was elsewhere. He rose, moving silently toward the sideboard where Jenkins had placed a tray of candles. The guests were distracted, some whispering, others adjusting to the dim light, but Poirot's focus was singular. He had noticed something, a faint glint near the base of a candelabrum, half hidden by the folds of a linen napkin. With a deft movement he retrieved the object. A small silver cufflink, engraved with the initials E.H. It was delicate, almost feminine in design, yet sturdy enough to belong to a man. Poirot turned it over in his gloved hand, his mind racing. E.H. Edmund, Holt, the botanist-physician, or another, yet unknown. The cufflink was out of place, far from the dining table where Holt had sat, and its presence suggested carelessness or deliberate misdirection. He slipped the cufflink into his pocket beside the red petal and the memory of the smudged desk, and returned to his seat just as the electric lights sputtered back to life. The guests blinked, their faces a mix of relief and lingering unease. Poirot's gaze swept the room, landing on Dr. Holt, who was adjusting his cuff with a subtle, almost unconscious gesture. One sleeve, Poirot noted, was slightly askew, as if a cufflink were missing. "Curieux," Poirot murmured, his fingers tapping lightly on the table. A clue in the candlelight, so small, yet so revealing. But what does it tell us? The conversation resumed, stilted and cautious, but Poirot's mind was elsewhere. He recalled the layout of the manor. The sideboard was near the door to the corridor, which led to the study and the garden beyond. Had the cufflink been dropped during a hasty retreat? Or was it planted, a false trail to mislead him? The killer, he sensed, was playing a game, and this clue was a move on the board. To test his suspicions, Poirot decided to stir the waters. "Lady Beatrice," he said, his voice carrying just enough to draw attention. "This manor, it is full of treasures, non? Such fine silver, such delicate craftsmanship. I wonder, do your guests ever misplace their own treasures, say, a cufflink or a trinket?" Lady Beatrice's smile was tight. "Oh, it happens, Monsieur Poirot. Guests are forever leaving things behind. Jenkins usually finds them." "Indeed," Poirot said, his eyes flickering to Holt, who had gone still, his fork hovering mid-air. "And where might Jenkins find such a thing tonight, I wonder? Near the sideboard, perhaps?" Holt's face remained impassive, but his fingers tightened on the fork, a movement so slight it might have gone unnoticed by anyone but Poirot. Clara Langley, seated across from Holt, glanced at him, her eyes wide with something akin to fear. The exchange was brief, but Poirot filed it away, another thread in his growing tapestry. As the evening drew to a close, the guests retired to their rooms, their footsteps echoing in the silent corridors. Poirot lingered in the dining room, examining the sideboard once more. The napkin, he noted, had been slightly disturbed, as if someone had brushed against it in haste. He knelt, his eyes scanning the floor, and found a single tiny speck of dirt, damp, with a faint reddish hue, like the soil of the rose garden. "Hastings," Poirot said, rising and brushing his hands, "the candlelight has given us a gift, but it is a riddle. This cufflink, this speck of earth, they point to a path, but is it the killer's or a trap laid for Poirot?" Hastings shook his head, bewildered. "You're seeing clues everywhere, Poirot. How do you know what's important?" Poirot's smile was enigmatic. "Everything is important, mon ami, until it is not. The little grey cells, they sort the wheat from the chaff. And tonight they tell me one thing. The killer was here, in this room, and they have left a trace they cannot erase." As they left the dining room, the candles still flickered, their light casting long shadows that seemed to whisper of secrets yet to be uncovered. Poirot's mind buzzed with possibilities, each clue a step closer to the truth, and to the trap he would soon set. Chapter 5. The Game of Questions. The morning after the candlelit dinner, Ashford Manor was steeped in a restless quiet, as if the very walls held their breath. The fog had lifted, but the air remained heavy with suspicion, each guest eyeing the others with veiled distrust. Hercule Poirot, however, was in his element, his small frame radiating a quiet confidence as he prepared to unravel the tangled threads of Sir Reginald Vance's murder. In the Manor's library, with its towering bookshelves and scent of aged leather, Poirot had arranged for a series of private interviews. The room, bathed in the pale light filtering through tall windows, was the perfect stage for what he called the game of questions, a delicate dance of words designed to unsettle, provoke, and reveal. "Mon ami," he said to Captain Hastings, who was arranging chairs with a look of mild exasperation, "the truth is like a shy creature. It hides in the shadows, but with the right questions we coax it into the light. Today we play the hunter." Hastings sighed, setting down a chair with a thud. "I don't see why you can't just ask them straight out, Poirot. Did you kill Sir Reginald?" "Simple enough." Poirot's eyes twinkled with amusement. "Ah, Hastings, simplicity is for the amateur. The killer will not confess so easily. No, we must ask the questions that seem irrelevant, the ones that make the mind stumble and the tongue betray." The first to enter was Lady Beatrice Ashford, her posture as regal as ever, though her eyes betrayed a flicker of unease. Poirot greeted her with a courteous bow, gesturing to a chair. "Madam, a small matter, if you please. The night of the murder, you were in your study, oui? Tell me, what is the view from your study window?" Lady Beatrice blinked, caught off guard. "The view? Why, it overlooks the courtyard, and part of the rose garden, I suppose. But I was working, Monsieur Poirot, not gazing out windows." "Of the course," Poirot said smoothly, his tone disarming. "And the rose garden? It is beautiful, no? Did you happen to notice anyone there, perhaps, as you glanced up from your accounts?" Her fingers tightened on her shawl. "No, I saw no one. It was dark, and I was focused on my work." Poirot nodded, his expression unreadable, but his mind catalogued her hesitation. The study window, he knew, offered a clear view of the garden path where Sir Reginald's body was found. Her denial was too swift, too absolute. Next came Miss Clara Langley, her delicate features drawn with nervous energy. Poirot offered her a gentle smile, his voice soft as velvet. "Mademoiselle, you are fond of music, I hear. The quartet at the ball, they played a waltz, oui? Did you dance, or perhaps step outside for air during the evening?" Clara's hands twisted in her lap, her ring catching the light. I didn't dance. I stayed in the ballroom mostly. I don't recall going outside." "Not even for a moment?" Poirot pressed, his eyes locking onto hers. "The air in the ballroom, it was warm, no? A young lady might seek a breath of fresh air near the garden, perhaps near the roses." Her breath hitched, and she shook her head vehemently. "No, I stayed inside, I swear it." Poirot leaned back, satisfied. Her denial, like Lady Beatrice's, was too emphatic, and her eyes had darted to the left, a classic sign of fabrication, or fear. He made a mental note to revisit the garden path, where the speck of reddish soil had been found. Dr. Edmund Holt was next, his scholarly demeanour tinged with impatience. Poirot shifted tactics, adopting a tone of idle curiosity. "Doctor, your work with plants, it is most fascinating. Tell me, do you ever collect specimens from the manor's grounds? A petal, perhaps, or a cutting from a rare bloom?" Holt's jaw tightened, his fingers brushing the sleeve where a cufflink was missing. "I've taken a few samples, yes, but nothing unusual. The Manor's gardens are common enough." "Common, you say?" Poirot tilted his head. "And yet I found a petal, vibrant red, not from any rose. Could it be from your greenhouse, perhaps? Or did you notice such a flower near the fireplace, where you spoke with Sir Reginald?" Holt's eyes narrowed, but he maintained his composure. "I don't recall any such petal. You're grasping at straws, Monsieur Poirot." Poirot smiled, unperturbed. "Perhaps, doctor. But straws, they make a fine nest for the truth, no?" Bixiou. The interviews continued. Poirot wove his web, asking each guest questions that seemed trivial, but struck at the heart of their alibis and motives. To Colonel Mortimer, he inquired about the timing of his whiskey breaks, noting the Colonel's vague recollection of the hour. To Mrs. Evelyn Pritchard, he asked about the Manor's lighting, catching her slip about seeing a figure in the corridor near the study. To Mr. Julian Trent, he posed a question about Sir Reginald's business rivals, observing the barrister's guarded response. By midday, the library was silent again, and Poirot stood by the window, his hands clasped behind his back. Hastings, slumped in a chair, looked bewildered. "Well, Poirot, did you learn anything? They all seemed rattled, but I didn't hear a confession." Poirot turned, his expression one of quiet triumph. "Confessions, Hastings, are for the climax. Today we have planted seeds of doubt. Lady Beatrice hides what she saw. Clara fears what she knows, and Holt guards a secret tied to that petal. The game of questions has begun, and the killer, they feel the net tightening." He tapped his temple, his eyes gleaming. "The little grey cells, they hum with activity. Soon we shall see who stumbles first." As they left the library, Poirot's mind was alight with connections. The cufflink, the petal, the smudged desk, the garden soil. Each question had been a probe, and each answer a clue. The game was far from over, but Hercule Poirot was playing to win. Chapter 6. The Shadow of Doubt. The afternoon at Ashford Manor carried a chill that seeped beyond the stone walls, as if the house itself mourned the violence within its grounds. The guests, confined by Inspector Grayson's orders and their own fears, moved like spectres through the corridors, their voices hushed, their eyes darting. Hercule Poirot, however, was undeterred, his mind a whirl of calculations as he sifted through the clues amassed thus far. The red petal, the silver cufflink, the smudged desk, the faltering alibis. Yet a new event was about to cast a shadow of doubt over his carefully constructed theories. Poirot stood in the conservatory, a glass-domed haven filled with exotic plants, their leaves glistening under the weak sunlight. He had come to inspect Dr. Holt's greenhouse, hoping to trace the origin of the mysterious red petal. The air was humid, heavy with the scent of earth and blooms, and Poirot's meticulous fingers brushed a vibrant flower, its petals a close but imperfect match to his clue. "Curieux," he murmured, his eyes narrowing. "Close, but not the same. The truth, it eludes me still." Captain Hastings, trailing behind, wiped his brow. "This place is like a jungle, Poirot. Are you sure that petal's worth all this bother? It could have blown in from anywhere." Poirot's moustache twitched with mild reproach. Nothing, mon ami, is insignificant in a murder. The petal is a whisper from the killer, and I shall hear its message." Their conversation was interrupted by a sudden commotion from the manor. A scream, sharp and piercing, followed by the clatter of footsteps. Poirot and Hastings hurried toward the source, arriving in the grand hallway to find a scene of chaos. Miss Clara Langley stood trembling, her face ashen, clutching a torn shawl. Beside her, Colonel Mortimer was bellowing for Inspector Grayson, while Lady Beatrice tried to restore order. "What has happened?" Poirot demanded, his voice cutting through the din. Clara's voice quavered as she spoke. Someone tried to push me down the stairs. I was coming from my room and I felt a hand. Oh, it was awful!" Poirot's eyes sharpened, taking in her dishevelled appearance, the shawl ripped at the shoulder, and a faint bruise forming on her wrist. "A hand, mademoiselle? Did you see who it was?" She shook her head, tears welling. "No, it was too dark. The hallway light was out, and I only felt the push. I caught the railing just in time." Inspector Grayson, arriving breathless, began questioning the guests, but Poirot's mind was already racing. A second attack, so soon after Sir Reginald's murder, suggested either desperation or a calculated escalation. He knelt to examine the staircase, noting a faint scuff mark on the carpet, as if someone had slipped in haste. The hallway light, he confirmed, was indeed out, its bulb loosened in its socket, a deliberate act, not an accident. "Hastings," Poirot said quietly, "this is no coincidence. The killer grows bold, or perhaps afraid. But why Clara? Is she a threat or a diversion?" Hastings looked sceptical. "She's awfully shaken, Poirot. Could she be making it up? Her alibi's shaky, after all." Poirot's gaze was distant, his fingers tapping his chin. "Possible, mon ami, but unlikely. The bruise, the torn shawl, they are not easily staged. No, this attack is real, and it casts a shadow over my theories." Until now, Poirot had leaned toward Clara as a key figure. Perhaps not the killer, but someone with knowledge of the crime. Her nervous demeanour, her faltering alibi, her connection to the fireplace conversation, all pointed to a secret. But an attempt on her life suggested she was a target, not a perpetrator. Or was the attack a ruse, designed to deflect suspicion from her? The cufflink with E.H. still pointed to Dr. Holt, but his guarded responses and missing cufflink could be misdirection, and Lady Beatrice's evasive answers about the study window gnawed at Poirot's certainty. He gathered the guests in the drawing-room, his presence commanding despite his small stature. "Mesdames et messieurs," he began, his voice calm but firm, "a second act of violence has occurred. I urge you to be vigilant and to speak the truth. The smallest detail, a sound, a shadow, may unmask the culprit." Dr. Holt, his face tight with strain, spoke up. "This is madness, Monsieur Poirot. First Reginald, now Clara. We're all in danger." "Perhaps," Poirot said, his eyes locking onto Holt's. "Or perhaps the danger is selective. Tell me, Doctor, where were you when Mademoiselle Langley was attacked?" Holt bristled. "In my room, reviewing notes. I heard the scream and came running, like everyone else." "And you, madam?" Poirot turned to Lady Beatrice. "In the parlour, with Mrs. Pritchard," she replied, her tone clipped. "We were discussing household matters." Poirot noted the hesitation, the quick glance between Holt and Clara. The alibis once again were solitary or conveniently paired, impossible to verify. He let the silence linger, watching as the guests shifted uncomfortably, their masks of innocence fraying under the pressure. As the group dispersed, Poirot lingered, his mind wrestling with the new evidence. The scuff mark, the loosened bulb, the attack on Clara, they were pieces of a puzzle that no longer fit his initial assumptions. Had he underestimated the killer's cunning? Was the red petal, the cufflink, the smudged desk leading him astray? "Hastings," he said, his voice low, "the shadow of doubt is a dangerous thing. It tempts us to question everything, even the little grey cells. But I, Hercule Poirot, shall not falter. The truth is near, and this attack, it is a mistake, a crack in the killer's armour." Hastings shook his head, bewildered. "You sound awfully sure, Poirot. I'm starting to think we're chasing a ghost." Poirot's smile was enigmatic. "A ghost, perhaps, but one with a pulse. And soon, mon ami, we shall make it bleed." As they walked back to the conservatory, Poirot's resolve hardened. The attack on Clara was a turning point, a desperate move by a killer feeling the noose tighten. The game was shifting, and Poirot was ready to play his next card. Chapter 7. The Trap is Set. The twilight at Ashford Manor draped the estate in a hush, as if the very grounds anticipated the next act in the deadly drama. Hercule Poirot, standing by the tall windows of the library, gazed out at the shadowed rose garden where Sir Reginald Vance had met his end. His mind a whirl of clues and contradictions, the red petal, the silver cufflink, the smudged desk, the attack on Clara Langley, had reached a critical juncture. The time for observation was over. Now he would act. "Mon ami," he said to Captain Hastings, who was pacing the room with a restless energy. "The killer is clever, but even the cleverest fox grows careless when the hounds are near. Tonight we set a trap, and the killer, they shall step into it." Hastings stopped, his brow furrowed. "A trap, Poirot? What kind of trap? And how do you know it'll work? We're still no closer to pinning down who did it." Poirot's eyes gleamed with quiet confidence. "Patience, Hastings. The little grey cells, they have woven a net from the threads we have gathered. The petal, the cufflink, the attack, they are not random. They point to a mind that thrives on control, but control can be turned against them." Poirot had spent the afternoon in quiet consultation with Inspector Grayson, convincing the reluctant constable to allow a staged event under the guise of advancing the investigation. The plan was simple in its elegance, yet intricate in its execution. A gathering in the ballroom, ostensibly to reenact the night of the murder, with each guest asked to retrace their movements. But beneath this pretense lay Poirot's true purpose, to create a scenario where the killer, feeling the pressure of scrutiny, would reveal themselves through a misstep. He began by summoning the guests to the library, his demeanour grave but authoritative. Lady Beatrice, Miss Clara Langley, Dr. Edmund Holt, Colonel Mortimer, Mrs. Evelyn Pritchard, and Mr. Julian Trent stood or sat in a tense semicircle, their faces a mix of curiosity and dread. "Mesdames et messieurs," Poirot began, his voice steady, "the murder of Sir Reginald Vance and the attack on Mademoiselle Langley have cast a dark cloud over this house. To find the truth, we must return to the night it began. Tonight in the ballroom, we shall recreate the evening's events, where you stood, What you saw, what you heard, every detail matters. Lady Beatrice's lips tightened. Monsieur Poirot, is this necessary? Reliving that night feels macabre. Necessary, madam, because the killer is among us, Poirot replied, his gaze sweeping the room. And they will not expect us to shine a light so closely on their actions. Clara Langley, still pale from her ordeal, clutched her shawl. Will it be safe, after what happened to me? Poirot's tone softened, but his eyes were sharp. You will be protected, mademoiselle. Inspector Grayson and his men will be present, and I, Hercule Poirot, shall ensure no harm comes to you. Dr. Holt adjusted his glasses. His voice clipped. This sounds like a parlour game, not an investigation. What do you hope to achieve? Poirot smiled enigmatically. Clarity, Doctor. The truth hides in the shadows, but tonight we shall illuminate it. As the guests dispersed to prepare, Poirot outlined the finer details to Hastings and Grayson in private. The ballroom would be arranged as it was on the night of the murder, with the same quartet playing, the same drinks served, and the same lighting, save for one deliberate change. Poirot had instructed Jenkins, the butler, to place a small, innocuous object, a replica of the letter opener used in the murder, on a side table near the fireplace, where the whispered conversation had taken place. The replica was harmless, its blade dulled, but its presence was designed to provoke. The killer, Poirot explained, will see the letter opener and fear exposure. They may try to move it, hide it, or even accuse another. Their reaction, it will betray them. Hastings looked dubious. And if they don't take the bait? What then? Then, mon ami, we learn something else, Poirot said. Inaction is as revealing as action. The killer cannot resist the pressure of the moment. As evening fell, the ballroom was transformed, its chandeliers aglow, the quartet striking up a familiar waltz. The guests, dressed in attire mimicking the fateful night, moved through their assigned roles with strained precision. Lady Beatrice lingered near the fireplace, Clara hovered by the windows, Holt stood by the sideboard, and the others followed suit, their eyes darting to Poirot, who watched from a corner like a conductor overseeing an orchestra. The replica letter opener gleamed on the side table, its silver catching the light. Poirot's gaze was relentless, tracking every glance, every hesitation. Clara's fingers twitched as she passed the table, but she did not touch it. Holt's eyes lingered on it, his jaw tightening, before he turned away. Lady Beatrice, poised, as ever, seemed to avoid the table entirely, her movements deliberate. Then a subtle movement caught Poirot's eye. Mrs. Pritchard, the gossipy dowager, paused near the table, her fan fluttering. Her hand hovered, as if to adjust her shawl, but Poirot saw the flicker of intent. She nudged the letter opener, letting it slip beneath a fold of cloth, her eyes darting to see if anyone noticed. "Intéressant," Poirot whispered, his heart quickening. Was Mrs. Pritchard the killer, or merely a pawn in a larger game? The trap was sprung, but the prey was not yet clear. As the reenactment continued, Poirot moved silently, his mind alight with possibilities. The letter opener's displacement was a clue, but not the only one. The killer was close, their control slipping, and Poirot was ready to tighten the net. "Hastings," he murmured, his voice barely audible. The trap is set, and the fox is circling. Tonight we shall see its face. The music swelled, the guests played their parts, and Poirot waited, his little grey cells poised for the moment of truth. Chapter 8. The False Confession. The ballroom of Ashford Manor, alive with the strains of the quartet and the flicker of chandelier light, seemed to hold its breath as Hercule Poirot's carefully orchestrated reenactment unfolded. The replica, letter-opener, subtly displaced by Mrs. Evelyn Pritchard, lay hidden beneath a cloth, a silent testament to the trap's first ripple. Yet, as the evening progressed, an unexpected twist emerged, threatening to unravel Poirot's meticulously laid plans. Poirot stood near the fireplace, his small frame almost invisible among the swirl of guests, his eyes darting from one face to another. The tension in the room was palpable, each guest aware of the scrutiny, their movements stilted under the weight of suspicion. Captain Hastings, stationed by the doors, whispered, "Poirot, did you see Mrs. Pritchard move that opener? Could she be the one?" Poirot's moustache twitched, but his voice was low. "Perhaps, mon ami, but the fox is cunning. We must wait for the next move. The trap, it is not yet complete." As the reenactment neared its climax, with guests retracing their steps from the night of Sir Reginald Vance's murder, a sudden commotion broke the rhythm. Miss Clara Langley, her face pale and her eyes brimming with tears, stepped forward, her voice trembling but resolute. "I can't bear it any longer," she cried, her words echoing in the stunned silence. "It was me. I killed Sir Reginald. I couldn't let him ruin everything." A collective gasp rippled through the room. Lady Beatrice's hand flew to her throat. Dr. Edmund Holt's glasses slipped down his nose, and Mrs. Pritchard's fan froze mid-flutter. Inspector Grayson, caught off guard, stepped forward, but Poirot raised a hand, his expression unreadable. "Mademoiselle Langley," he said, his tone calm but piercing, "this is a grave confession. Tell us, if you please, how you committed this crime, and why." Clara's hands twisted her shawl, her voice faltering. He was threatening me. Sir Reginald knew something about my family, my inheritance. That night I followed him to the rose garden. I took the letter-opener from the study, and I stabbed him. I didn't mean to, but I was so afraid. The room buzzed with murmurs, but Poirot's gaze was unrelenting, dissecting every word, every gesture. Clara's confession was dramatic, emotional, yet something in her delivery, the rehearsed cadence, the lack of specific detail, struck him as artificial. He stepped closer, his voice soft but insistent. "Curieux, mademoiselle. You say you took the letter-opener from the study. At what hour, precisely? And how did you know Sir Reginald would be in the garden?" Clara's eyes widened, a flicker of panic crossing her face. "It was after 10, I think. I saw him leave the ballroom, and I followed. I don't remember exactly. It all happened so fast." Poirot tilted his head, his smile disarming but his eyes like steel. "And the petal, mademoiselle, the vibrant red petal I found near the fireplace. Was it from a flower you wore, perhaps? Or one you dropped in your haste?" Her breath hitched and she stammered, "Petal! I don't know anything about a petal. I wasn't near the fireplace." The room fell silent, the weight of her, words hanging in the air. Poirot's mind raced. Clara's confession was crumbling under scrutiny, her details vague and contradictory. She had not mentioned the cufflink, the smudged desk, or the garden's reddish soil. Clues only the true killer would know to avoid. Was she lying to protect someone, or to divert suspicion from herself? Before Poirot could press further, Dr. Holt stepped forward, his face a mask of anguish. "Stop this, Monsieur Poirot. Clara's lying to protect me. I was with her that night. We were together, and she's taking the blame to shield me." The room erupted in whispers, and Hastings leaned toward Poirot, muttering, "Good Lord, Poirot, now we've got 2 confessions. What's going on?" Poirot's expression remained serene, but his little grey cells were ablaze. Holt's intervention was unexpected, yet it fit the pattern of loyalty and deception he had sensed. The cufflink with EH pointed to Holt, but his sudden defence of Clara suggested a deeper bond, perhaps romantic, perhaps conspiratorial. Or was this another layer of misdirection? "Doctor," Poirot said, his voice cutting through the chaos, "you claim Mademoiselle Langley protects you. Were you then in the rose garden? Did you wield the letter opener?" Holt hesitated, his jaw tightening. "No, I didn't kill him, but I was nearby. I saw Clara leave the ballroom, and I followed, worried for her. I didn't see the murder, but I know she's innocent." Poirot's eyes narrowed. "And yet you did not mention this before, no? A curious omission, Doctor, for one so eager to protect." As Inspector Grayson moved to question Clara and Holt further, Poirot stepped back, his mind sifting through the new evidence. Clara's confession was false. He was certain. Too theatrical, too convenient. Holt's defence, while passionate, was equally suspect, timed to disrupt the trap's momentum. And Mrs. Pritchard's subtle move with the letter opener lingered in his thoughts. Was she the killer, manipulating Clara and Holt? Or was another guest, perhaps Lady Beatrice, or the quiet Mr. Trent, pulling the strings? The reenactment ended in disarray, with Grayson escorting Clara to a private room for further questioning. Poirot lingered in the ballroom, his fingers brushing the cloth where the letter opener lay hidden. The trap had worked, but not as he expected. Instead of a single misstep, it had provoked a cascade of revelations, each obscuring the truth further. "Hastings," Poirot said, his voice low, "the false confession is a smokescreen, but it tells us much. Clara and Holt, they are bound by a secret, but it is not murder. The killer, they watch from the shadows, delighted by this chaos. But I, Hercule Poirot, shall not be fooled." Hastings shook his head, bewildered. "You're still confident. Poirot, this feels like a mess to me." Poirot's smile was enigmatic. "A mess, yes, but within it lies order. The trap has shaken the tree, and soon the rotten fruit will fall." As the guests dispersed, their faces etched with fear and suspicion, Poirot's resolve hardened. The false confession was a hurdle, but it had narrowed the field. The killer was closer than ever, and the net was tightening. Chapter 9. The clock strikes truth. The atmosphere in Ashford Manor had grown brittle, as if the very air might shatter under the weight of secrets and accusations. The chaotic aftermath of Clara Langley's false confession and Dr. Edmund Holt's impassioned defence lingered, leaving the guests restless and the investigation teetering on the edge of clarity. "Hercule Poirot, undaunted, stood in the manor's grand hallway, his eyes fixed on the towering grandfather clock as its pendulum swung with metronomic precision. The time was nearing midnight, and Poirot sensed that the hour of truth was at hand. "Mon ami," he said to Captain Hastings, who was rubbing his temples in frustration, "the clock, it is more than a keeper of time. It is a witness, silent, but unerring. Tonight it shall help us unravel the sequence of Sir Reginald Vance's murder." Hastings groaned. "Poirot, we've got Clara confessing, Holt muddying the waters, and Mrs. Pritchard acting shifty with that letter-opener. How's a clock going to sort this mess?" Poirot's moustache curved with a faint smile. "By ticking, Hastings. Every event has its rhythm, its place in the symphony of the night. The little grey cells, they have been listening, and now they hear the melody." Poirot had spent the day retracing the timeline of the murder, cross-referencing alibis against physical evidence. The red petal, the silver cufflink, the smudged desk, the reddish garden soil, and the loosened hallway bulb, all pointed to a crime meticulously planned, yet marred by small errors. Clara's confession had been a distraction, Holt's defence a desperate act of loyalty, but neither accounted for the precise mechanics of the murder. The key, Poirot realised, lay in timing. When Sir Reginald left the ballroom, when the killer struck, and when the letter-opener was taken. He gathered the guests in the drawing-room, their faces drawn with exhaustion and suspicion. Lady Beatrice sat rigidly, her hands folded. Clara, red-eyed, avoided Holt's gaze. Mrs. Pritchard fanned herself nervously. Colonel Mortimer sipped whisky. Mr. Julian Trent watched silently, and Dr. Holt adjusted his glasses, his expression guarded. Inspector Grayson stood by the door, ready to act on Poirot's cues. "Mesdames et messieurs," Poirot began, his voice clear and commanding. "The murder of Sir Reginald Vance was no act of impulse. It was a performance, timed with precision. Let us reconstruct the night, step by step, and see where the clock betrays the killer." He paced slowly, his hands clasped behind his back. The ball began at 8. By 10, the quartet played a waltz, and Sir Reginald was seen near the fireplace, speaking with Mademoiselle Langley, Dr. Holt, and Lady Beatrice. Mademoiselle Langley claims she retired soon after, but her alibi falters. Dr. Holt says he was in the library. Yet a cufflink, bearing his initials, was found near the sideboard. "Madame Ashford, you were in your study with a view of the rose garden, yet you saw nothing." Lady Beatrice's lips thinned, but she said nothing. Clara's hands twisted in her lap, and Holt's jaw tightened. Poirot continued, his voice steady. Sir Reginald's body was found at dawn, but the blood on the letter-opener was dry, suggesting the murder occurred hours earlier, likely between 10:30 and 11. The letter-opener was taken from the study, where a smudge of red, like the petal found by the fireplace, was left on the desk. The killer, they moved swiftly, but not invisibly. He paused, letting the silence build tension. "Now, let us consider the clock. The manor's clocks are synchronized, and the hall clock struck 10 as the waltz ended. Mademoiselle Langley, you said you took a sleeping draught at 10:30, yet you were seen in the ballroom at 10. Dr. Holt, you claim to have been in the library, but the library clock is slow, by 5 minutes I discovered today, and Madame Ashford, your study clock ticks loudly, yet you heard no one enter to take the letter-opener." A murmur rippled through the room. Mrs. Pritchard's fan snapped shut, and Colonel Mortimer coughed into his glass. Poirot's eyes gleamed as he pressed on. The killer left the ballroom after 10, took the letter-opener, and lured Sir Reginald to the garden. The reddish soil on the garden path matches a speck found in the dining-room, near the sideboard where the cuff-link was dropped. The attack on Mademoiselle Langley, with its loosened bulb, suggests the killer fears exposure. But the clock tells us more. The reenactment last night ended at 11, and Mrs. Pritchard, you moved the replica letter-opener at precisely 10:52, as I noted by the ballroom clock. Mrs. Pritchard gasped, her face flushing. I did no such thing. I merely adjusted the cloth. Poirot raised a hand, his tone gentle but firm. Madame, your action was subtle, but it was seen, and it raises a question. Why fear the letter-opener unless it holds a secret? Before she could respond, Poirot turned to the group. The timeline is clear. The killer was in the ballroom at 10, in the study by 10:15, and in the garden by 10:30. Their alibi must account for these moments, and only one among you cannot. He paused, his gaze sweeping the room, watching for the telltale flinch. Clara's eyes darted to Holt. Holt's fingers gripped his chair, and Lady Beatrice's composure wavered, her hand brushing her necklace. But it was Mr. Julian Trent, the quiet barrister, whose stillness caught Poirot's eye, a stillness too deliberate, too controlled. Curieux, Poirot said softly, his mind locking onto a new possibility. Trent had offered little, his alibi vague, a walk in the corridors, alone. His silence was not fear, but calculation. Was he the shadow behind the clues, manipulating the others? The clock has spoken, Poirot concluded, his voice resonant. The truth is near, and the killer, they feel its weight. Tomorrow we shall see who cannot bear it. As the guests dispersed, their faces etched with unease, Poirot lingered, his fingers brushing the cufflink in his pocket. The timeline had narrowed the field, but Trent's quiet presence gnawed at him. The trap was tightening, and the clock's truth would soon unmask the fox. Hastings, he said, his voice low, the shadow of doubt is lifting. The killer is close, and their time is running out. Hastings shook his head, awestruck. You're a marvel, Poirot. But I still don't see how you'll catch them. Poirot's smile was enigmatic. With patience, mon ami, and the tick of the clock. The truth, it always strikes on time. Chapter 10. The Mirror of Motives. The morning light filtered weakly through the heavy drapes of Ashford Manor's drawing-room, casting long shadows that seemed to echo the tangled web of deceit surrounding Sir Reginald Vance's murder. Hercule Poirot stood at the centre of the room, his small, impeccable figure commanding attention as he prepared to confront the suspects with a new strategy. The timeline had been clarified. The clues: red petal, silver cufflink, smudged desk, reddish, soil, woven into a coherent pattern. But the killer's identity remained elusive. Now, Poirot would hold up a mirror to their motives, reflecting their own words and actions to expose the truth. Mon ami, he said to Captain Hastings, who was arranging chairs with a mix of anticipation and confusion, the human heart is a labyrinth, but it cannot hide from its own reflection. Today, we shall use the suspect's motives as a mirror, and the killer, they will see themselves unmasked. Hastings frowned, setting down a chair. Motives, Poirot. Everyone here seems to have a reason to dislike Sir Reginald, but how will you sort out who acted on it? Poirot's eyes twinkled with quiet confidence. By listening, Hastings. The killer's motive is a melody, played in their glances, their hesitations. We shall amplify it until they cannot deny the tune. The guests filed in, their faces a gallery of strain and suspicion. Lady Beatrice Ashford sat with regal poise, her hands clasped tightly. Miss Clara Langley, still shaken from her false confession, avoided eye contact. Dr. Edmund Holt adjusted his glasses, his scholarly demeanour fraying. Mrs. Evelyn Pritchard clutched her fan, her gossip-prone nature subdued. Colonel Mortimer gripped a glass, his bluster muted, and Mr. Julian Trent, the barrister, maintained his enigmatic silence, his eyes sharp and watchful. Inspector Grayson stood by the door, ready to intervene. Mesdames et messieurs, Poirot began, his voice clear and resonant. The murder of Sir Reginald Vance was not a crime of chance, but of intent, born from a motive so powerful it drove one of you to kill. Today we shall examine these motives not as accusations, but as truths you have already revealed. He turned to Lady Beatrice, his tone courteous but probing. Madam Ashford, Sir Reginald was your friend, yet I heard him speak harshly to you by the fireplace, calling something a disgrace. Was it your family's honour he threatened, or perhaps a financial secret tied to the manor? Lady Beatrice's composure faltered, her fingers brushing her necklace. He was upset about a business matter. Nothing personal. I had no reason to harm him. Poirot nodded, his gaze unwavering. And yet your study overlooks the rose garden where he died. You saw nothing, you say, but your hesitation speaks louder than your words. He shifted to Clara, his voice softening. Mademoiselle Langley, you confessed to the crime, a lie born of fear. Sir Reginald knew something about your inheritance, oui? A scandal, perhaps, that could ruin you? Clara's eyes filled with tears, her voice barely audible. He threatened to expose a debt my father left. It would have ruined me, but I didn't kill him. I swear it. Poirot's expression was unreadable, but he noted her sincerity and her glance toward Holt. He turned to the doctor next. Dr. Holt, your cufflink was found near the sideboard, and your defence of Mademoiselle Langley was passionate. Was Sir Reginald a rival for her affections, or did he know of your experiments? Perhaps a botanical secret that could disgrace you? Holt's face reddened, his hands clenching. That's absurd. Reginald was a nuisance, yes, but I had no reason to kill him. My work is academic, nothing more. Poirot raised an eyebrow, his tone mild. And the red petal, doctor? It matches no flower in the manor's gardens, but perhaps one in your greenhouse? Before Holt could respond, Poirot pivoted to Mrs. Pritchard, whose fan snapped open. Madame Pritchard, you moved the replica letter opener during the reenactment. Sir Reginald's sharp tongue, it wounded your pride, no? Or was it his knowledge of a rumour you wished to keep buried? Mrs. Pritchard gasped, her voice shrill. I moved nothing, and Reginald's gossip was no threat to me. I'm above such pettiness. Poirot's smile was enigmatic as he addressed Colonel Mortimer. Colonel, Sir Reginald's business dealings crossed yours, oui. A failed investment, perhaps, that cost you dearly. The colonel coughed, his glass trembling. He was a sharp dealer, I'll give you that, but I'd not stoop to murder over money. Finally, Poirot turned to Mr. Julian Trent, whose silence had grown conspicuous. Monsieur Trent, you say little, but your eyes see much. Sir Reginald's legal troubles, they were known to you, no? As a barrister, did he threaten your reputation, or perhaps a client's? Trent's lips curved faintly, his voice cool. Sir Reginald was a client briefly. His death is inconvenient, but I had no part in it. Poirot stepped back, letting the room absorb the weight of his words. Each of you had a motive, a reason to wish Sir Reginald gone. But only one acted, leaving clues, a petal, a cufflink, a smudge, a loosened bulb. These are not accidents, but signatures of intent. The killer, they sit among us, their motive reflected in their own words. A tense silence followed, broken only by the tick of the clock. Clara's hands trembled. Holt's gaze flickered too. Her and Lady Beatrice's fingers tightened on her necklace. Mrs. Pritchard's fan fluttered erratically, and Colonel Mortimer downed his whisky. But it was Trent's stillness, his unblinking stare, that drew Poirot's attention. A predator watching the herd. Hastings, Poirot whispered as the guests began to disperse, their nerves frayed. The mirror has done its work. The killer feels the reflection, and they will act to shatter it. We must be ready. Hastings shook his head, awestruck. You're pushing them hard, Poirot. What if they all crack? Poirot's eyes gleamed. Then, mon ami, we shall find the one whose pieces do not fit. The trap tightens, and the mirror of motives will reveal the truth. As the room emptied, Poirot's mind buzzed with connections. Trent's calm was too perfect, Holt's loyalty too fervent, Clara's fear too raw. The killer was cornered, and the next move would be theirs. But Poirot was ready to meet it. Chapter 11. The Killer's Misstep. The air in Ashford Manor crackled with tension, as if the walls themselves sensed the climax approaching. Hercule Poirot's relentless probing, through timelines, motives, and carefully laid traps, had pushed the suspects to their limits. The red petal, the silver cufflink, the smudged desk, the reddish soil, and the loosened bulb had all pointed to a cunning killer. But it was the reenactment and the mirror of motives that had set the stage for their final mistake. Now, in the quiet hours before dawn, Poirot's trap was about to spring. Poirot stood in the Manor's dimly lit study, his small figure silhouetted against the glow of a single lamp. The room, with its heavy oak desk and shelves of leather-bound books, was where the letter-opener had been taken, where the smudge of red had been found. It was here, he had decided, that the killer would make their move, driven by the pressure of his accusations and the fear of exposure. "Mon ami," he said to Captain Hastings, who was stationed near the door, his face a mix of nerves and determination. "The killer is cornered like a fox in a snare. They will act tonight, desperate to cover their tracks. We must be the shadows that catch them." Hastings gripped his walking stick, his voice low. "Poirot, are you sure about this? What if they don't show? Or worse, what if they come armed?" Poirot's moustache twitched with a faint smile. "They will come, Hastings. The little grey cells, they have read the score, and the music is reaching its crescendo. As for danger, Inspector Grayson is nearby, and I, Hercule Poirot, am not so easily outwitted." The trap was subtle but ingenious. Poirot had let slip, during the day's interrogations, that he intended to examine the study again, hinting at a final clue hidden there, a clue that could unmask the killer beyond doubt. In truth, no such clue existed, but the suggestion was bait, designed to lure the killer into action. He had also arranged for the study's door to be left slightly ajar, the lamp left burning, and a small deliberate detail added, a single red petal, identical to the one found by the fireplace placed on the desk beside the remaining letter openers. As the Manor's clocks struck 2, a faint creak echoed in the corridor. Poirot's eyes sharpened, his body still as a statue. Hastings tensed, his hand tightening on his stick. The door eased open, and a figure slipped into the room, their movements cautious but hurried. The lamplight revealed Mr. Julian Trent, the barrister, his usually composed features taut with urgency. Trent's eyes darted to the desk, locking onto the red petal. His breath hitched, and he reached for it, his fingers trembling slightly. But as he did, Poirot stepped forward, his voice calm but resonant. "Bonsoir, Monsieur Trent. You seek to remove the petal, non? A curious choice for one who claims no connection to the crime." Trent froze, his hand hovering above the desk. For a moment, his face was a mask of shock, but he recovered quickly, his voice smooth. "Monsieur Poirot, you startled me. I couldn't sleep and thought to check the study. I heard you mention a clue." Poirot's smile was razor-sharp. "A clue, oui, but one I placed for you. The petal. It is a twin to the one by the fireplace, where you stood with Sir Reginald, arguing about a legal matter, perhaps. A matter so grave it led to murder." Trent's composure cracked, his eyes narrowing. "You're bluffing, Poirot. You have nothing but guesses." Poirot stepped closer, his gaze unrelenting. "Guesses, monsieur? The petal came from a rare flower in Dr. Holt's greenhouse, where you visited, claiming interest in botany. The cufflink, marked E.H., was yours, not Holt's, borrowed from a client, perhaps, and dropped in haste. The smudge on the desk, it matches the ink you use, and the reddish soil from the garden clung to your shoes, found near the sideboard. And the loosened bulb in the attack on Mademoiselle Langley. A lawyer's trick to cast suspicion elsewhere." Trent's jaw tightened, his hand inching toward his pocket. But before he could act, Inspector Grayson emerged from the shadows, his voice firm. "That's enough, Mr. Trent. Step back." Trent's shoulders sagged, the fight draining from him. "You're clever, Poirot," he muttered. "Too clever." Poirot's expression was sombre. "Clever, oui, but it is your misstep that betrays you. You could not resist the petal, fearing it tied you to the greenhouse, to the night you planned Sir Reginald's death." As Grayson restrained Trent, Poirot turned to Hastings, who was staring, wide-eyed. "Good Lord, Poirot, you did it! But how did you know it was him?" "The little grey cells, mon ami," Poirot said softly. Trent's silence was his shield, but his motives, greed, fear of exposure as Sir Reginald's corrupt lawyer, were his undoing. The petal was the final thread, and he could not let it lie. The study grew quiet, the lamplight flickering as Trent was led away. Poirot's trap had worked, the killer's missteps sealing their fate. But the victory was bittersweet, for the truth now revealed, would leave scars on Ashford Manor. "Hastings," Poirot said, his voice low, "the trap is sprung, but the story is not yet complete. Tomorrow we shall explain all, and the manor will know justice." Hastings nodded, still stunned. "You're a marvel, Poirot, a blooming marvel." Poirot's smile was faint, his eyes distant. "Perhaps, mon ami, but even marvels must face the weight of truth." Chapter 12. The Unveiling of Justice. The grand drawing-room of Ashford Manor was steeped in a solemn hush, its heavy drapes drawn to let in the pale light of a late morning. The guests, their faces etched with a mix of relief and trepidation, gathered for what Hercule Poirot had promised would be the final act of the drama that began with Sir Reginald Vance's murder. The killer, Mr. Julian Trent, had been caught in Poirot's trap the previous night. His misstep with the red petal, sealing his fate. Now Poirot stood before the assembled company, ready to weave the threads of the case. Red petal, silver cufflink, smudged desk, reddish soil, loosened bulb, into a tapestry of truth. "Mesdames et messieurs," Poirot began, his voice resonant and authoritative, "the murder of Sir Reginald Vance was a crime of calculation, but no crime escapes the scrutiny of the little grey cells. Today I, Hercule Poirot, shall unveil the how and the why of this tragedy, so that justice may be served." Captain Hastings, seated near the fireplace, leaned forward, his eyes wide with anticipation. Inspector Grayson stood by the door, his expression one of grudging respect. Lady Beatrice Ashford, Miss Clara Langley, Dr. Edmund Holt, Mrs. Evelyn Pritchard, and Colonel Mortimer sat in a tense semicircle, their gazes fixed on Poirot. Poirot paced slowly, his hands clasped behind his back. "Let us begin with the night of the ball. Sir Reginald, a man of wealth and secrets, stood by the fireplace, arguing with Mademoiselle Langley, Dr. Holt, and Madame Ashford. I overheard words, 'Disgrace cannot continue,' hinting at a motive. A red petal, vibrant and rare, fell to the hearth, a clue I later traced to Dr. Holt's greenhouse. Holt shifted uncomfortably, but Poirot raised a hand. "Patience, Doctor. You are not the killer, though your flowers played a role." He continued, his voice steady. "Sir Reginald was stabbed in the rose garden between 10:30 and 11, with a letter opener from the study. The killer left clues. A smudge of red ink on the desk, reddish soil from the garden, a silver cufflink marked E.H. near the sideboard, and a loosened bulb in the attack on Mademoiselle Langley. These were not accidents, but signatures of a meticulous mind." Poirot turned to Clara, his tone gentle. "Mademoiselle Langley, your false confession was born of fear. Sir Reginald threatened to expose your family's debt, You lied to protect Dr. Holt, with whom you share a bond." Clara's cheeks flushed, and Holt reached for her hand, his face softening. We love each other," Holt admitted. "Reginald was pressuring her, but we didn't kill him." "Précisément," Poirot said, nodding. "Your cufflink, Doctor, was a red herring, borrowed by the killer to mislead. The true E.H. was a fiction, crafted by Monsieur Trent." A murmur rippled through the room. Mrs. Pritchard's fan fluttered, and Lady Beatrice's lips parted in shock. Poirot pressed on, his gaze sweeping the group. "Madame Pritchard, you moved the replica letter opener during the reenactment, fearing it pointed to you. But your motive, wounded pride from Sir Reginald's gossip, was not enough for murder. Colonel Mortimer, your financial losses were real, but your bluster hid no killer's intent. Madam Ashford, you saw something from your study window, yet said nothing, protecting the manor's honour. Lady Beatrice's eyes dropped. Her voice, low. I saw a figure in the garden, but I couldn't be sure. I didn't want scandal. Poirot nodded, then turned to the heart of the matter. Monsieur Julian Trent, the barrister, was the architect of this crime. As Sir Reginald's lawyer, he embezzled funds, a secret Reginald discovered. Fearing exposure, Trent acted. He visited Holt's greenhouse, taking a rare flower to wear as a boutonniere, its petal falling by the fireplace. He took the letter opener, leaving a smudge of his red ink. In the garden, he stabbed Sir Reginald, dropping the cufflink, stolen from a client, to implicate Holt. The soil on his shoes trailed to the sideboard, and the loosened bulb was his attempt to silence Mademoiselle Langley, who overheard his argument with Reginald. Trent, now in custody but allowed to hear the denouement, sat stone-faced, his earlier defiance gone. Poirot's voice grew sombre. The trap was set in the study, with a replica petal as bait. Trent, fearing it tied him to the greenhouse, could not resist removing it. His misstep was his undoing, for the petal was my creation, a mirror to his guilt. The room was silent, the weight of Poirot's words settling over the guests. Inspector Grayson stepped forward, nodding. "A fine piece of work, Monsieur Poirot," Trent confessed, "and we found documents in his room confirming the embezzlement." Clara sobbed softly, Holt's arm around her. Mrs. Pritchard's fan lay still, and Colonel Mortimer raised his glass in a silent toast. Lady Beatrice's eyes glistened, her voice barely audible. "Thank you, Monsieur Poirot. The manor is safe again." Poirot bowed slightly, his expression grave. "Justice, madame, is a heavy burden, but it is served. The truth, it always finds its way." As the guests dispersed, their relief tempered by the scars of the ordeal, Poirot lingered, his gaze distant. Hastings approached, his voice awed. "You did it, Poirot. You caught him, just like you said." Poirot's smile was faint, tinged with melancholy. "Oui, mon ami, but the victory is never without cost. The human heart, it bleeds even in triumph." The clock in the hallway struck noon, its chimes a reminder of the time that had brought truth to light. Poirot's work was done, but the echoes of the case would linger, a testament to his brilliance and the price of justice. Chapter 13. The Echo of the Trap. The sun hung low over Ashford Manor, casting golden rays across the rose garden where Sir Reginald Vance had met his end. The manor, once a stage for secrets and suspicion, now stood quiet, its guests preparing to depart after Hercule Poirot's triumphant unveiling of the killer, Mr. Julian Trent. The weight of justice had settled, but its echoes lingered, reverberating through the hearts of those touched by the tragedy. Poirot, ever the observer of the human condition, stood alone on the terrace, his small frame silhouetted against the fading light, his mind reflecting on the case that had tested even his formidable intellect. Captain Hastings joined him, his usual cheer tempered by the gravity of the past days. "Well, Poirot," he said, his voice soft, "you've done it again. Trent's in custody, the manor's at peace, and Clara and Holt can breathe easy. I'd say that's a job well done." Poirot's moustache twitched, but his smile was faint, his eyes distant. "Oui, mon ami, the trap caught the fox, and justice is served. Yet I wonder, Hastings, at what cost? The human soul, it is fragile, and even the truth leaves scars." Hastings frowned, puzzled. "Scars? Everyone's safe now, aren't they? You solved the puzzle, as always." Poirot turned, his gaze sweeping the garden, where the roses swayed gently in the breeze. "The puzzle, yes, but the heart, it is not so easily mended. Mademoiselle Langley, she carries the weight of her fear, her false confession born of love. Dr. Holt, his loyalty tested, must face the shadow of suspicion. Madame Ashford, she hid the truth to protect her home, and now lives with the guilt of her silence. Even Madame Pritchard and Colonel Mortimer, they are changed, their trust in others diminished." He paused, his fingers brushing the red petal in his pocket, now a keepsake of the case. And Trent, the killer, his ambition and greed led to ruin. But he too is human. The trap, it caught him, but it also revealed the frailty of us all. Hastings shifted uncomfortably, unused to Poirot's introspective mood. "You sound almost sorry for him, Poirot. He murdered a man, tried to hurt Clara. Surely he deserves what's coming." Poirot nodded slowly, his voice low. "Deserves, oui. But to understand the crime is to see the man behind it. Trent's motive, fear of exposure, the loss of his reputation, it drove him to madness. I do not pity him, Hastings, but I reflect. The little grey cells, they solve the crime, but the heart, it asks why." The terrace grew quiet, the only sound the distant chirping of birds. Poirot's thoughts drifted to the clues that had led him to Trent. The red petal from Holt's greenhouse, the cufflink stolen to mislead, the smudged ink, the reddish soil, the loosened bulb. Each had been a thread in the tapestry, but the weaving had required more than logic. It had demanded an understanding of human nature, of the delicate balance between truth and deception. He recalled the moment in the study, when Trent reached for the petal, his misstep sealing his fate. The trap had been simple yet profound, a reflection of Poirot's belief that the guilty cannot resist the lure of their own guilt. But now, in the aftermath, he questioned the morality of his methods. Had he manipulated too much? Pushed too hard? The manner was safe, but its peace was fragile, a veneer over wounds that would take time to heal. "Hastings," Poirot said, breaking the silence, "do you ever wonder if the truth is worth its price? To catch a killer, we stir the waters, and the ripples touch all." Hastings scratched his head, his honesty shining through. "I suppose so, Poirot. But if you hadn't stirred, Trent might have killed again. You did what was right." Poirot's smile returned, warmer now. "Perhaps, mon ami, the little grey cells, they do not rest, but they are grateful for your simplicity. It reminds me that justice, though heavy, is necessary." As the sun dipped below the horizon, Lady Beatrice appeared at the terrace door, her face softened by gratitude. "Monsieur Poirot," she said, her voice steady but warm, "we owe you more than words can express. The manor is whole again, thanks to you." Poirot bowed, his courtesy impeccable. "Madame, it is my duty to seek the truth. I am glad to have served." She hesitated, then added, "Will you stay another day? The manor would be honoured." Poirot shook his head gently. "No, madame. The truth is found, and my work here is done. The manor must heal, and I have other puzzles to solve." As Lady Beatrice retreated, Poirot turned back to the garden, his heart lighter but still shadowed. The echo of the trap would linger, a reminder of the delicate dance between justice and compassion. He slipped the red petal from his pocket, letting it fall to the terrace, where it was caught by the breeze and carried away. "Come, Hastings," he said, his voice resolute. "The world awaits, and the little grey cells, they are never idle." Hastings grinned, falling into step beside him. "To the next adventure, then." Poirot's eyes twinkled, his spirit renewed. "Oui, mon ami, always to the next," and, with that, they left the terrace, the manor fading into the dusk, its secrets laid bare, its future uncertain but hopeful, thanks to the brilliance of Hercule Poirot.